Welcome to the Self-Control Show, the podcast for men who are successful everywhere except at home. If you've got a short fuse, can't control your tone, or find yourself snapping before you even realize it, then you're in the right place. Most men were never taught how to regulate their nervous system, so they default to anger, control, or checking out. This show is about changing that. It's not therapy, it's not fluff. It's training, so you can lead with presence, power, and self-control. Let's get to work. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about tone. And who here can relate to being told, or maybe it being reflected back to them? They're in a bit of a heated argument or a debate or a discussion with their wife, maybe even with their kids. And you hear something like, hey, it's not even about what you said. It's about how you said it, right? And a lot of guys will shrug this off, right? But the thing is your tone is the first thing that your wife hears and your kid hears, right? It's the first thing that their system picks up on. And if you want your message to be received, then this is absolutely an episode for you to listen to and get clear on so that we can understand really what's going on for them and why we might be stuck in like this frustrating loop of like basically not knowing that we're doing the thing that is setting our, people that we care about off, basically, and like what it's actually teaching your kids and your wife about you. So when we think about what's actually going on for us, practically speaking, like how this can show up is like, you ask your kid once, twice, third time, and then, nothing happens. And then what do? We naturally have a propensity to raise our voice, right? Or to say it with more conviction. And ultimately, we can say the same thing with a different tone and have a different impact, right? And an easy example of this would just be like using my name, like, hey, Jason. The tone is friendly, it's welcoming, it's like curious, maybe even, versus, hey, Jason, right? Where the volume has leveled up and the intensity of how I said the thing has increased, right? Same two words, two completely different meanings, and those are going to have two completely different impacts on the person that I'm talking to. One is going to have somebody being a little bit more open and curious, maybe even like excited to listen to what I'm about to say. Or I guess a reverse thing would be true if somebody was talking to me like, hey, Jason, I'd be more open to and curious to and maybe even excited about what they had to say versus if somebody's like, hey, Jason, immediately, I don't even know what they're going to say. My defenses are going to be up, right? I'm going to be anticipating and probably thinking the worst of what might happen as if it were a threat. So the same thing is happening for your kids. You're not just speaking to them, you're actually programming them in what to expect, right? And practically what that looks like is like when you think about this logically, which I always like to do because it like actually makes things less complicated in my opinion, because kids can be confusing and complicated as it is. What you want to look at it through is the lens of what you're teaching their nervous system, especially through the ages of 0 and 7. They're like little sponges, and their brains and their nervous systems are being shaped by like a felt sense of safety, not logic, right? A lot of times we can like be like getting caught up in reason with a 5-year-old and it just like not landing. And that's because they don't have that capacity yet. Basically, they don't ask themselves like, oh, is dad mad? Why is he mad? Right? There's a shift in their system when your tone changes, right? They don't actually understand the words. What happens is they shift into like a fight or flight state, right? Because they're afraid. Like maybe not physically, but maybe physically. But they're afraid not only physically, maybe, even if you've never spanked them, let's say, of a disconnection, right? Oh, something's wrong with dad. That means I'm not safe because they're upset at me. And that actually puts them in a survival mode as opposed to a mode where what little prefrontal they have is active and engaged and curious and able to learn. Basically, practically, when you elevate your tone, instead of your kid thinking like, hey, what could I have done differently there so that next time I could be a little bit better, right? If they're in that fear survival mode because we're yelling at them or we're raising our voice or we're using a stern tone, what we're actually doing is having their brains go and think about like, oh shoot, what do I need to do to keep dad calm? again, like kids have such limited capacity for this. What starts to happen is, and what we're training them to do, is to be more tuned into our feelings and our tone, because again, they kind of get stuck in that survival and anticipation mode instead of like learning to do the hard shit that it is to be a human being, whether that be able to get dressed and ready in the morning, do the dishes or put away the dishes before they go play, right? Anything to do with like executive functioning, delayed gratification, being able to follow through, that part of their brain turns on less the more we use harsh tones. It's crazy, right? So if you keep your tone sharp, it keeps them monitoring you and not focus on their own behavior, right? Because basically your kid's learning like when dad gets tense, I need to be afraid, because eventually what's going to happen is that tone's going to amplify. And where we get lost is, it's so common to like think our kids are more capable than they really are because they've done the thing before, right? And when they don't do the thing, immediately what happens in a lot of our systems is it's a dysregulation for our nervous system because we take it as disrespect, right? Or they're not complying, right? And it's like we're not in control. And like, what does that say about us as a dad if our kids can't do this yet? So what do? We amplify. And here's the double-edged sword about raising your voice is it works. In the moment, I'm sure you guys have all experienced raising your voice when your kids aren't listening, all of a sudden they listen. And that's the truth, right? But it's a short-term benefit without taking into the consideration the long-term ramifications, and not shaming anybody that has yelled before, right? Or raised their voice before, right? Because sometimes it can feel like, well, what the heck do I do instead? And what we want to do, because like when we do that, what happens is we basically break connection with our kid. And what we put there instead is like anxiety or maybe even hypervigilance. Again, going back to the idea is of like our kids are then thinking like, hey, what do I need to do to make dad calm? As opposed to like, what can I do differently next time? And what we do want is to connect first before we correct, right? That way, it's like we're tuning into where they're at versus like forcing them into fear and then again replacing all that with hypervigilance. Where this typically comes from and why it can feel like we don't realize that we're doing what we're doing is because it's familiar. It's maybe something that we experienced growing up. Like in a lot of ways, it's kind of like, some guys say, like, I'm turning into my dad. He raised his voice. And like when you think back, it's like, do I like that? It's like, no, right? But when we are in a lot of ways desperate in the moment, especially with how hard it is to be a dad, right? To be a parent, what we're going to do is we're just going to like default back, right? There's a saying that I love that applies to fatherhood, um, that you hear a lot in like the training space. Is like when you're in a tough situation and there's everything on the line, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your training, right? And in these cases, as a dad, you default to basically what was done to you in those hard moments, right? Even if you didn't like that when you were growing up. And that's kind of the crux of it. And that's kind of where a lot of guys get stuck. They are stressed out from work all day, don't know how to regulate their own stress. Then they come home, and that is just a difficult place to be because it is so hard to be a dad or a mom, right? It's so hard to be a parent. Our kids are learning to regulate themselves, but like can't do that. So they get dysregulated. It dysregulates us. We default back to yelling. We yell. We raise our voice to get them to listen because we're stressed and we're dysregulated, and their dysregulation dysregulates us. But then afterwards, we look back and either our wife points it out, we see it in our kids' face, like if they're afraid, right? Maybe they come to us asking like, Dad, hey, are you mad at me? Do you still love me? Right? And that just like kills us, right? And we feel bad afterwards, but the cycle repeats. Next time we tell ourselves maybe like, hey, I'll be better next time, right? We have all intentions to change, but then we don't have the tools to do that, right? And then it gets back to the same like, hey, we just like think we're going to rise to the occasion, we're going to think about it, and we're going to have the mindset of that, but then our nervous system is like, nope, don't think so. Here's dysregulation. And you go back and repeat the pattern, right? And this isn't about like being like super soft or like super gentle parenting, right? There's like a lot of guys, especially those guys in my Instagram DMs and comments that are like, this is how you make kids soft. And like, this is the problem with kids these days. When in fact, it's like, no, actually, like what we're seeing is the repercussions of decades of like harshness. Permissive parenting is kind of on the other end of the spectrum, which I think a lot of people like misconstrue, like we'll call it regulated parenting versus like permissive parenting, which is like, oh, hey, like validate all your kids' emotions and just let them do whatever they want. That's not what this is about, right? This is about you staying regulated in the moment so you can be firm and loving, right? You can be with them in the hard emotions, right? Firm with boundaries and, not let them walk all over to you. But it's all about the delivery, right? It's all about the idea of if my kid is dysregulated, right, they're not going to be able to hear anything that you're saying. So again, the key core thing here is connecting with your kid before you correct. And once you get them back into a regulated state, you can talk about the problem, maybe in a more logical way. So, what you want to do as a dad is learn the tools to regulate yourself, right? You want to be able to pause before you speak, take a breath with a long exhale before you react, right? And here's the hard hitting questions you want to ask yourself where you're at now. Like, ultimately, would you want to be spoken to like that? Right? The way that you're talking to your kids or the way that you're about to talk to your kids, right? Or, hey, if another adult spoke to my kid the way that you do, how would that sit with you? Would you want to punch them in the face, right? Or how about this? If another man used that tone with your wife, would you let that slide, right? And those are some hard look in the mirror questions that you need to ask yourself. Because here's the deal. Like, again, we're setting up wiring for later. What happens when we don't really take this seriously is how we set the standard basically becomes the standard for our kids. And for your daughter, if harshness or a certain tone is normal for them, when they get into a relationship with a man, as they're going to most likely, when they have weak moments, right? When the boyfriend or the fiance or the husband have weak moments and they default to tone and yelling, guess what your daughter's going to do? Oh, yeah, this is normal. Dad did it. Their nervous system isn't going to be like, ooh, yeah, that's not good. I remember my childhood. I grew up, my dad was safe. He didn't respond that way. He was cool, calm, and collected. That's not how you respond. And they'll naturally be repelled by that. Women, they use the term get the ick. We want our daughters to get the ick when they hear a tone of voice or disrespect or raising a voice happen, especially when they're dating somebody. Same goes for your son. Would you want them repeating this with their wife? How proud would you be if you were a fly on the wall watching a hard interaction with your son's wife and the way that he talked to him, if he talked to him the same way that you talk to your wife, right? And not to say that this can't also be flipped where your daughter repeats it and your son accepts it. Both ways that can happen. And the only way to solve this is to learn why and how you're responding the way that you're responding and replace it with new tools and new tactics. Again, you're never going to rise to the occasion. I hate to break it to you if you haven't heard that saying before, right? In tough times, we fall to the lowest level of training, right? Or we fall to the level of our training, right? And if you're not training regulation, and if you can't regulate your emotions and you can't regulate your nervous system, you're always going to crumble when you're in pressure. Because when you don't have the tools, right, oftentimes we work double time, making sure that we're calm at work, right? So many guys that I work with, hey, I don't have this problem at work. But when we get home, all of a sudden, the living room's not cleaned up, or our kids spill, or something happens, or they didn't load the dishes. And then it's like 0 to 100, or there's a short fuse, right? Or we lose it over seemingly nothing. And then the cycle repeats, like we were talking about earlier. And ultimately, what that results in is not only a disconnection and most likely our adult relationships with our kids less and less likely to be of the high quality for them to want to hang around us when they don't need us. And them choosing into partnerships or relationships or marriages or whatever that resemble the relationship that you had with them or that your wife had with them. So if this is something that is going on for you, 100% you're in the right place. This is exactly like what I help men learn the tools to be able to work through in a new way, right? Because what we want is better relationships. We want to be able to be the man that our kids come to when they're having a hard time, not the guy that they run away from in the storm because like we are the storm. We want to be the lighthouse for them, right? We want to be that safe haven that they know that they can count on. We want to be the safe place for our wife to bring the hard stuff. We want to be that rock and that backbone and that foundation of our family. And if this is you, then definitely check out the link in this bio description to book a free call. That's where I recommend to start. Get on a call, you'll meet with me, and we'll talk about what's going on for you to see if I can help. And if I can, then we can talk about, what that looks like and your options from there. So thanks everybody for listening. Let me know if you have any other ideas for episodes that you'd like to hear. And thanks always for tuning in.